"My heart belongs to another man entirely," she confessed, so I simply nodded fine and left her behind. Now he's married someone different and she just appeared at my doorsteps. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am, trying to make sense of 4 years that I thought meant something. For 4 years, I worked as a telecommunications engineer while Melody pursued her dream of becoming a professional chef, attending culinary school part-time while working at a local bistro. I'm Jason, 29, and I genuinely believed we were building something real together, a partnership where my technical stability would complement her creative passion. Our entire relationship revolved around supporting her culinary ambitions, and I threw myself into that role completely. I paid for her expensive knife sets, those German steel beauties that cost more than my monthly car payment. I funded her cooking classes, weekend workshops, and specialized technique seminars that she insisted were essential for her development. I even rented a larger apartment with a premium kitchen so she could practice at home, complete with professional-grade appliances and marble countertops that I knew she'd love. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in our shared tomorrow. Every extra dollar spent on her dreams felt like money well spent on our future. I took on additional consulting projects, working nights and weekends to fund her aspirations, because I believed that supporting the person you love was what real partnership looked like. When she got excited about a new cooking technique or raved about a dish she'd perfected, I felt proud of what we were building together. I thought I was watching her bloom into the chef she was meant to be, never realizing I was actually just funding her escape from the life we'd created. I saw every expensive ingredient she requested, every specialized tool she claimed she needed, every workshop she attended as steps toward the restaurant we dreamed of opening together someday. Looking back, I realize I was building a foundation for a future that only existed in my mind, while she was using my resources to explore possibilities that never included me. Warning signs emerged about 18 months ago when Melody started mentioning Diego, a renowned chef she met during a weekend culinary workshop in Miami. Initially, she spoke of him as a mentor, praising his innovative fusion techniques and his restaurant empire spanning 3 cities. I remember the first time she brought him up, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "He's revolutionizing modern cuisine," she told me, describing his approach to combining traditional techniques with molecular gastronomy. "Diego understands food as art, not just sustenance." I supported her enthusiasm, thinking it was healthy for her to have professional role models and mentors in the industry. However, her tone gradually shifted as she began criticizing my corporate mindset and lack of understanding about the artistic soul of cooking. Suddenly, my practical approach to finances became evidence that I didn't understand creativity, and my steady engineering career was proof that I lacked real passion. She started staying late at the bistro for what she called collaborative sessions, claiming she was working on new recipes with other chefs who shared Diego's innovative vision. Her phone became increasingly precious to her, always face down during dinner, constantly buzzing with notifications she'd quickly silence. When I asked about her day, she'd become evasive, talking in vague terms about networking with culinary professionals and expanding her artistic horizons. The word authentic became her favorite weapon against everything I represented. Diego lived authentically as a chef, she'd say, while I was just another tech worker without real passion or understanding of what it meant to create something beautiful. I watched her transform from the woman who used to cook for me with joy into someone who treated my presence in the kitchen like contamination of her sacred creative space. She'd critique my simple cooking attempts with barely concealed disdain, suggesting I stick to what I knew, while she explored real culinary artistry. The woman I'd fallen in love with was disappearing, replaced by someone who spoke in pretentious culinary jargon and treated our 4-year relationship like a stepping stone she was ready to abandon. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, watching her practice techniques she'd learned from someone who was clearly becoming more important to her than I was. Every conversation about her future plans started including references to Diego's philosophy or methods, while discussions about our shared dreams quietly disappeared from her vocabulary entirely. Melody's behavior became increasingly erratic as she started taking weekend trips to what she called food festivals and pop-up events that Diego was allegedly hosting or attending. She'd pack her nicest clothes and that expensive chef's knife set I'd bought her for Christmas, claiming these were professional networking opportunities that could advance her career. I trusted her completely at first, even helping her research hotels and offering to drive her to the airport. She would return home glowing with excitement, practically vibrating with energy as she described elaborate dishes and revolutionary techniques she'd supposedly learned. Diego showed us this incredible way to deconstruct traditional flavors. She'd gush, launching into detailed explanations of molecular gastronomy techniques that sounded impressive but felt rehearsed. But whenever I tried to engage with her experiences, asking specific questions about the events or suggesting we try some of these techniques together in our kitchen, she became cold and distant. "You wouldn't understand," became her standard response. "It's not just about following recipes, Jason. It's about understanding the soul of food." Her criticism of my lifestyle intensified beyond anything I could have imagined. She mocked my predictable schedule, calling my 9-to-5 routine soul-crushing conformity, and suggesting that my practical approach to finances showed I had no appreciation for art or beauty. When I mentioned wanting to start a savings account for our future restaurant, she rolled her eyes and said, "Real artists don't think like accountants." She began treating my engineering work like it was beneath her, referring to my projects as corporate drone work and my colleagues as people who've given up on their dreams. When I attempted to surprise her by booking a reservation at an expensive Michelin-starred restaurant for our anniversary, thinking she'd appreciate the culinary artistry, she dismissed it as trying too hard and said Diego would find such commercial establishments soulless and profit-driven. According to her, truly great food came from passion and authenticity, not from restaurants that catered to people like me who wouldn't know real flavor if it hit them. The emotional distance grew so vast that we barely spoke during meals anymore, with Melody constantly texting someone she claimed was a culinary networking contact, while I sat across from her feeling like I was dining alone. She'd respond to messages with little smiles and soft laughs, the kind of reactions I used to get from her, now directed at her phone screen. Our conversations became stilted and formal, like we were roommates rather than partners who'd spent 4 years building a life together. She started referring to our relationship in past tense during casual conversations, saying things like, "Back when I thought I wanted a traditional life," or "before I understood what real passion felt like." I watched her transform from someone who used to light up when I walked through the door into someone who barely acknowledged my presence unless she needed something. The worst part wasn't even her obvious emotional withdrawal, but the way she made me feel guilty for noticing it, as if my concerns about our relationship were evidence of my inability to support her artistic growth and personal evolution. The confrontation came when I discovered expensive lingerie in Melody's luggage from her latest culinary retreat, items she'd never worn for me. Black lace pieces that still had the tags on them, hidden beneath her chef's whites and notebooks filled with what she claimed were new recipes. When I calmly asked for an explanation, holding up the lingerie with quiet confusion rather than anger, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she launched into a cold, calculated speech that felt like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. "I've been living a lie for months, Jason," she said, her voice steady and almost clinical. "This isn't working anymore, and I think we both know it." I stood there holding evidence of her betrayal while she spoke about our 4-year relationship like it was a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. She revealed that her heart had belonged to Diego from the moment they met, describing their connection as a meeting of culinary souls that I could never understand or compete with. "Diego sees food the way I do," she explained, as if this justified everything. "He understands that cooking is about passion, about creating something transcendent. You see it as just another skill, another hobby to fund." With shocking callousness, she explained that Diego had been teaching her not just cooking techniques but how to live authentically, and that I represented everything mundane and passionless in her old life. "I've been settling, Jason," she said, the words cutting deeper than any knife she'd ever wielded in the kitchen. "I thought I wanted stability and security, but Diego showed me what real passion feels like. What it means to be with someone who truly understands your soul." She claimed our 4-year relationship had been her settling period, a phase she'd needed to go through before finding her true destiny, with someone who could match her artistic vision and creative energy. "You're a good man," she said, as if that was supposed to comfort me, "but you're not the right man for who I'm becoming. Diego and I are planning to open a restaurant together in Miami. We're going to create something revolutionary, something you could never be part of because you don't understand the artistic vision. She actually expected me to fight for her, to break down emotionally and beg her to reconsider, to validate her decision by showing her how devastated I was. I could see it in her eyes, that anticipation of drama, the way she positioned herself like she was expecting a scene worthy of a movie. She wanted me to rage, to cry, to make grand gestures that would prove how much I'd valued what we had, so she could feel important and desired while still choosing her authentic, new life. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she demanded when I just stood there processing her words. "Aren't you going to fight for us?" The entitlement in her voice was staggering, as if I owed her an emotional breakdown to make her betrayal feel more significant and meaningful. Instead of the dramatic scene melody anticipated, I simply nodded and said, "Fine," before methodically beginning to pack my belongings. The single word seemed to deflate her entirely, like she'd been holding her breath for an explosion that never came. I walked to our bedroom closet and pulled out my old duffel bags, the ones I'd used in college before I'd thought I was building a permanent life with someone. My calm efficiency clearly unnerved her as I systematically began removing my contributions to our shared life, starting with my clothes and personal items before moving on to the bigger pieces. I unplugged my laptop and gaming console, wrapped my engineering textbooks in old t-shirts, and carefully packed the few family photos I'd brought to make our apartment feel like home. "What are you doing?" she asked, following me around the apartment like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You said you wanted to live authentically with Diego," I replied without looking at her. "I'm giving you that opportunity." I continued packing with businesslike precision, taking my furniture piece by piece. The leather couch I'd saved 6 months to buy, the coffee table I'd assembled myself, the bookshelf that held my technical manuals and the novels she'd always criticized as boring escapist fiction. When I started disconnecting my sound system and rolling up the area rug I'd bought for our living room, she began to panic. "Jason, this is crazy. We can talk about this like adults." But I was done talking. 4 years of conversations, for years of supporting her dreams, for years of believing we were partners, and it had all led to her casually discarding me for someone who understood her artistic soul. I moved to the kitchen and began removing my appliances, the coffee maker I used every morning, the blender I'd bought for protein smoothies, even the expensive stand mixer I'd given her for her birthday last year. "You can't take that," she protested. "I need it for my baking." "Then ask Diego to buy you a new one," I said, wrapping the mixer's cord around its base. "I'm sure he understands the importance of proper equipment for culinary artistry." When she demanded to know why I wasn't fighting for our relationship, why I wasn't trying to win her back or convince her that what we had was worth saving, I remained silent. There was nothing to fight for anymore. She'd made her choice months ago, probably during one of those first Miami workshops, and everything since then had just been her working up the courage to tell me. I wasn't going to beg someone to want me, wasn't going to compete with a fantasy she'd built in her head about passionate artistic love. My refusal to engage in her dramatic narrative left her standing speechless in the expensive kitchen I'd provided for her dreams, the very space that had become a symbol of my support for her ambitions now echoing with the silence of her own choices. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," she said, her voice smaller now, uncertain. "You're supposed to care more than this." But that was the problem. I had cared, deeply and completely, and she'd thrown it away for someone who probably saw her as nothing more than an entertaining distraction from his real life. I drove away without looking back, my entire life packed into my car, taking only what was mine and leaving behind the woman who had never truly been mine in the first place. 8 months later, I had transformed my life completely, moving to a sleek downtown apartment that was entirely mine and discovering who I actually was when I wasn't constantly supporting someone else's dreams. I took up rock climbing at a local gym, finding something deeply satisfying about the physical and mental challenge of scaling walls that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or artistic vision. Photography became my new passion, not because anyone told me it was worthwhile, but because I genuinely enjoyed capturing moments and learning about composition and lighting. I started learning woodworking in my building's makerspace, creating functional pieces with my own hands and feeling proud of work that had nothing to do with funding someone else's ambitions. These weren't just hobbies to fill time, they were activities Melody had always dismissed as distractions from real connection, or evidence that I lacked focus on what truly mattered. Through a mutual friend who still worked in the restaurant industry, I learned the devastating truth about Melody's authentic, new life with Diego. The news came during a casual conversation at a barbecue, delivered with the uncomfortable tone people use when they're not sure if they should be sharing bad news or if you even want to hear it. I don't know if you've heard, Marcus said carefully, but that chef Melody was seeing Diego? Turns out he was married the whole time. The story unfolded like a predictable tragedy. Diego had never left his wife and had used Melody merely as entertainment during his business travels to Miami and other cities where his restaurant group had locations. The renowned chef had been married for 15 years with 3 children, living in a beautiful house in Connecticut with a wife who'd supported his career from the beginning. When his wife discovered the affair through Melody's increasingly bold social media posts about their artistic partnership, Diego immediately cut all contact with Melody and transferred to his restaurant's West Coast locations to avoid any further complications. Melody had been fired from the bistro where she'd worked, not for the affair, but for her increasingly erratic behavior and frequent unexplained absences that coincided with her culinary retreats. Her boss had finally lost patience with her unreliability and attitude problems, particularly after she'd started treating her job like it was beneath her artistic aspirations. She was now working at a chain restaurant, one of those places with laminated menus and microwave-reheated appetizers, trying to make ends meet while her culinary school debt continued to accumulate. The authentic life she'd chosen had led to unemployment, isolation, and the brutal realization that she'd been nothing more than a disposable distraction to a man who'd never had any intention of leaving his established life for her fantasies. Her dreams of opening a revolutionary restaurant with Diego had evaporated the moment his wife threatened divorce proceedings, leaving Melody with nothing but debt, a damaged reputation in the local culinary scene, and the knowledge that she destroyed a 4-year relationship for an illusion. Melody's attempts to reconnect began subtly with social media likes and comments on my photography posts, little heart emojis and remarks like, "beautiful shot," that felt desperate and calculated rather than genuine. Then came the lengthy text messages filled with apologies and claims that she'd learned what real love meant through losing it. Her messages started arriving at all hours, sometimes coherent reflections on her mistakes, other times rambling confessions about how empty her life had become without me. "I know I hurt you terribly," one message read, "but I've realized that what we had was real and authentic in ways I was too immature to appreciate. Diego was a fantasy, but you were my reality, and I threw away the best thing in my life for a lie." She enlisted mutual friends to plead her case, with some even suggesting I should be the bigger person and help her through her crisis because everyone deserves a second chance, and she's really learned from this experience. Marcus called me one evening, clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle. "Look, man, I'm not saying you should take her back, but she's really struggling. Lost her apartment, had to move back in with her parents. Maybe just talk to her?" But I'd moved past the point where her struggles were my responsibility to solve. Her messages became increasingly desperate as my silence continued, describing her financial struggles working at the chain restaurant and her emotional breakdown after Diego disappeared from her life. She painted herself as the victim of a manipulative older man while simultaneously casting me as her one true constant, and the man who truly understood her heart beneath all the confusion. When these digital tactics failed, she began showing up at my workplace during my lunch breaks, somehow having discovered my new office location through our mutual connections. The first time, she waited by my car in the parking garage, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. "Jason, please, just 5 minutes," she begged, tears already streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I told her calmly that I appreciated the apology but had moved on, then drove away while she stood there crying in the parking garage. She started appearing at my gym, timing her arrivals to coincide with my regular workout schedule, forcing awkward encounters where she would break down crying and beg for just one conversation to explain everything. The gym staff eventually had to ask her to stop bothering members, but she found other ways to insert herself into my routine. The final confrontation occurred on a rainy Tuesday night when she appeared at my apartment door at nearly midnight, sobbing uncontrollably and declaring that losing me was the biggest mistake of her life. She looked broken in ways that went beyond her financial troubles, hollow-eyed, thinner than I'd ever seen her, wearing clothes that hung loose on her frame like she'd forgotten how to take care of herself. "Jason, I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice raw from crying. I wake up every day knowing I destroyed the only real love I've ever had for a fantasy that never existed. Diego used me, threw me away like garbage, and I lost you in the process. You were everything real and solid and good in my life, and I was too stupid and selfish to see it. I looked at the broken woman before me, unemployed, emotionally shattered, desperately clinging to a past she'd willingly destroyed, and felt nothing but detached pity. The woman I'd loved for 4 years no longer existed, replaced by someone who'd learned the hard way that authentic passion couldn't pay bills or provide emotional security. Melody, I said quietly, my voice steady and final, the man you left no longer exists. I've learned to build a life of genuine happiness without you, found interests and passions that have nothing to do with supporting someone else's dreams. You need to find your own path forward without expecting me to rescue you from the consequences of your choices. As I closed the door on her tearful pleas for another chance, for forgiveness, for any acknowledgement that what we'd had was worth salvaging, I felt the final weight of our shared history lift from my shoulders. The sound of her sobbing in the hallway faded as I walked back to my photography equipment, where I was editing shots from a weekend climbing trip with friends who valued my company for who I was, not what I could provide. I was finally free to embrace the authentic life I'd built from the ashes of her betrayal, one where my worth wasn't measured by my willingness to fund someone else's dreams but by my ability to create meaning and joy for myself.